get such great questions from young readers all the time, so I thought I would answer some of them here today. Question number one: what is your favorite place to visit? Well, I have to say it's the Mohawk Mountain House in New Paltz, New York. I love to go there in the fall with the foliage. It's so beautiful. And this is a mountaintop castle that sits on a lake on this mountain ridge in upstate New York. And you can climb to this tower that's way up on top of the mountain and get all the views around you. There's also thousands of acres of woods that you can hike in, and even a secret log cabin that you can find that was built 250 years ago. So, a magical place for me of wonder and beauty, and I love to go there every year if I can. Question number two: how do you develop your characters? Funny enough, I actually create their name first because a name can reveal a lot about a character to me. And once I get that name, then I start writing down the qualities of the character. I write down their strengths and their flaws because I definitely want them to have a mix, like we all do as people, right? And even some quirks because we all have some quirky things about us. For example, Sam, the main character in Unicorn Island, is a very independent character. She knows how to do so many things on her own, but she's also a risk taker, and sometimes she doesn't think before she actually decides about things that she's going to do, and she can get herself in a little bit of trouble. And one of her quirks is that she loves to cook, but she usually ends up burning the food, like her Uncle Mitch. This is something that they have in common. When creating a character, I like to think of heroic qualities like being brave or being loyal, but also some of those flaws that can make them more human. Because no one is perfect, and we want to create our characters as human as possible so that we can connect with them. And in connecting with them, we're also creating characters to care about. I also look to real people in my life to give me inspiration to create characters, like the character Bo Ches in my first children's book, Joshua and the Lightning Road. Now, Bo Ches stands for the big cheese, and this is actually my Uncle Jim. We all call him Bo Ches because he's the big cheese. He's like this big wrestler kind of guy, and he gives these great big hugs, and he's super kind and generous, and he gives great advice. And this is just like the character Bo Ches, who's the grandfather of Joshua in Joshua and the Lightning Road. Question number three: when you write a fantasy story, how do you know that you're not copying somebody else's idea? This is a great question, and I'm going to talk about how it really is not possible for you to copy somebody else's idea. And here's why: because pretty much every story has already been done before. It's true. Every plot follows a certain formula. You can have boy meets girl, or a hero goes on an adventure, or a hero has to solve a mystery, or maybe your hero is being chased. So there are only a few story plot ideas that are used to create the basis of every story. And keep this in mind: no one can write a story like you. Even if you come up with a similar idea to somebody else without even knowing about it, and this happens to authors all the time, you will put your own unique spin on it. And it will be unique because of your own imagination, ideas, and personal experiences. Nobody else has these but you. And you bring all of this to a story to make it your own. Question number four: how long have you been working on your current series? I started writing Unicorn Island back in the summer of 2019, and I actually wrote it in 5 days, but I had to run away to a cabin in the woods in order to get that done. I also did the same thing when I wrote book two, Secret Beneath the Sand, and I wrote that in 5 days as well. However, there was a lot of plotting involved before I actually sat down to write that story, about 2 months worth. My publisher asked me to write a story about a girl who had to take care of a unicorn. So that's all I had to go on. So I definitely had a lot of work to do when it came to plotting out the book. I had to create a whole world for this story to happen in. I had to create all of these characters and these mysterious creatures. And then, of course, after I wrote it in that 5 days, I had to spend another 2 months revising it. And here's something to keep in mind when you're writing a series: writing book two or book three or book four can actually be a lot harder than writing that first book, because you have to make sure that you incorporate all those details from book one in all the books that follow without actually repeating the story. Question number five: who is your favorite character that you've written about? I think Joshua is in my first children's book, Joshua and the Lightning Road, because I really connect with him. I actually took much of my own life and turned it into Joshua's story in the book. In the book, Joshua is an only child like me, and he also doesn't know who all of his family is, like I did growing up because I'm adopted. So I often didn't feel like I belonged growing up in my world, just like Joshua doesn't feel like he belongs in his world in the story. But Joshua is lucky because he has a great grandfather figure in Bo Ches, and he also makes some great friends along the way. Question number 6. How long does it take to publish a book? This is a great question with a complicated answer. First, it could take you anywhere from weeks to several months or even a year or more to write a book. Then you need several months to edit it and polish it to make it the best story it can be. Then, if you have a literary agent who can help you sell your book to a publisher, you'll need to get feedback from her. Then she'll have to put together a whole pitch package and send it out to editors and publishers. And then you wait for weeks and sometimes months. Then, if you're lucky enough to get your book sold to a publisher and it's good enough to be published, once you get that book deal, it usually takes about a year and a half to 2 years for your book to come out on the market and the bookshelves. So, overall, it can take at least 3 years to get a book all the way from being written to on the bookshelf. That sounds like a really long time, I know, but a published author is a writer who doesn't give up. So, if you don't give up on your writing, you will eventually become published. Something to keep in mind here as a writer, it's always good to have multiple projects to be working on. So maybe if one project doesn't work out, you can keep switching to another project to work on and revise. This is a good way to help you stay inspired with your writing and be positive. It's also a good idea to sometimes take a break from your book if you get stuck on it, like writer's block, where you get stuck in the middle or you can't figure out how to end it. Switch over to another book project and come back to it later. And if one of your projects doesn't work out, you still have others to motivate you and help you keep going with your writing. I know many authors whose books have not sold and they had to move on to other stories. And the same thing has happened to me. My very first book that I wrote, Joshua in the Fantastic Forest, is sitting in a shoebox here in my office. But I moved on and now I'm a published author today. And the same thing can happen for you. Question number 7. How do you come up with a plot for your stories? I love this question. I usually try to start simple, generally with just a question. For example, what if there was a girl who had to take care of a unicorn? Or what if there was a lightning road that you could travel on between worlds? This is the fun part of brainstorming a new story idea. Ask yourself what if questions. I then like to ask myself these questions and brainstorm while I go on long walks in the woods. There's something about being in nature that lets your mind wander and really allows it to be free to create. I highly recommend it. Question number 8. What is the most memorable story that you read as a child? Well, there are actually a few because it's really hard for a reader and a writer to pick just one book. So here's actually the first book that really made me want to be a writer: The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And this is actually my copy from when I was a young girl living in England. And I think this story really inspired me to not only become a writer, but also to write fantasy. I love creating fantasy worlds. And I still have many of my favorite childhood books, but there's two in particular that I love to reread every few years. And the first one is Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I love the whole series, but the first book is definitely my favorite. I so wanted to be Laura Ingalls when I was growing up. And actually, I really did connect with Laura when my parents owned and operated a campground in New Hampshire when I was a young girl. And we had a whole farm. We had chickens, and I used to have to collect the eggs. And we also had hogs, these big fat hogs that I would collect apples for in our orchard and feed them. So I really felt like I was Laura Ingalls for a little bit. The second book that I love to reread every couple of years is The Children of Green Know by L.M. Boston. And this book, as you can see, is very, very worn. I've read it so many times. It's a really magical book set in England, which is where I used to live when I was a young girl as well. Not only that, but it's also set in a medieval castle, and I love castles. It's full of mystery and magic and adventure, and I highly recommend it. Thank you so much, young readers, for asking such smart and fun and curious questions about being a writer and about being an author. I hope I've inspired you to keep reading and writing and know that someday you too can become a published author. And remember, a published author is a writer who doesn't give up.